Welcome to the Latino Newsletter podcast, a show about us all the time. I am your host, Julio Ricardo Varela, and today we start our 2024 election coverage thanks to the generous support from the Latino Community Foundation. LCF fulfills its mission by building a movement of civically engaged philanthropic leaders, investing in Latino-led organizations, and increasing political participation of Latinos in California. More at latinocf.org. Okay, so I'm super excited to kick off this podcast, which, as you know, I founded the LatinoNewsletter.org. It's a new nonprofit media outlet that's delivering daily subscriber posts from Monday to Friday. And now we're going to do a podcast as well. I'm going to do this weekly. And the initial response to the newsletter, to our website, to our social media handles, to this podcast has just been phenomenal. And personally for me, incredibly uplifting. I'm psyched. I feel like I'm back in the game. We're going to get the show going. And joining me today from Washington, D.C. is the fabulous Rafael Bernal, who's a staff writer for The Hill. And before we bring Rafa on, I'm actually going to read his official bio because I love it so fucking much. It's so good. I love this bio. So this is Rafa Bernal, if you go to The Hill, and this is what he says in his bio. I cover the Latino political world for The Hill. Everything from representation to migration. Sometimes the beat takes me to a local election, sometimes to high-stakes foreign policy summits in the Western Hemisphere. How awesome is that? I also host a weekly segment on Hill TV's What's America Thinking? Before joining The Hill, I was managing editor at UPI, where I helped complete their transition to a digital outlet. I'm a Mexico City native and a recovering attorney. That's a nice way to identify yourself. I started off as a railroad lawyer, then became a tax fraud analyst for the Mexican federal government, and slowly transitioned toward editorial jobs until I took the final dive by enrolling in the graduate program at Northwestern University's Medill School of Journalism. What a bio, huh? I love it. It's so personal. I love bios like that. And also, Rafa, full disclosure, really good friend of mine. Rafael Bernal, welcome to the Latino Newsletter.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here.
You know, you're my debut guest, and it's because you're a veteran reporter like me. We're going to use that as a superpower, Rafa, in the sense that it means you've seen it all when it comes to Latinos and politics. So here we are. We're at the beginning of August in 2024, middle of an election cycle that, wow, okay, since June 27th, since the debate, wow. What is the state of Latinos in this cycle right now based on your excellent reporting, based on all the stories that you're producing and publishing? Give me your big picture view here.
You know, for once, I think I can start with the good news there. Just like the rest of the political world, they're in upheaval. You know, everybody's trying to figure out whether, and again, the timestamp, early August, everybody's trying to figure out whether Vice President Harris's campaign will take off and whether different groups will align with her. So far, it's looking like she's very good with young people, especially, which means necessarily that she's doing well with Latinos because we're such a young demographic. So it's good news. I would say very much integrated into the day-to-day, into the pulse of a political world, and that really means it translates to representation.
So you, just to stay on this, Kamala Harris and Latinos, what are the specifics? I know you published, you had a memo, right? I remember reading that story. Yeah. So what can you tell, like, when you say young voters, and obviously because Latinos represent, I mean, just an incredible percentage of young voters. I mean, it's crazy. It's pretty substantial. What is the polling saying? Like, what are you reporting when I say Kamala Harris and Latinos? Kind of a complicated relationship too, but
Yep.
What do you got?
So I'm going to avoid specific numbers because the
You're a veteran
polls
reporter because
and
you
yeah,
know your shit.
and I might not remember the numbers exactly.
Yeah, because I can't even remember how many like young. I'm like, it's a big number. I couldn't give it to you now. I've read so many of them. Anyway, go.
The trend, the interesting trend is among Latinas. Let's start with that one.
Yeah,
Among Latinas, there were a lot of double haters. The people who didn't want to vote for Trump, didn't want to vote for Biden, or really didn't want to vote for Trump and weren't inspired by Biden, whatever combination you get to that. Um, because there are very few Harris double haters, and because Latinas were overrepresented in the double haters, she necessarily has that's a big bump. And Latinas are hugely important for any number of reasons, but they do tend to drive Latino political sentiment in the United States.
yeah,
Um, the other thing, the poll that you were referring to was that polling memo. It came out, the Biden Harris campaign at the time had it before any big decisions were made.
yeah,
And what they found is similar to the other thing. It's just that Vice President Harris has fewer negatives. So more people dislike or did not want President Biden to continue than dislike or do not want Vice President Harris to assume the presidency. And their positives were roughly similar, which is to be expected in a very divided country. But that translates to she has more positives than Biden, and she has more positives than Trump. There's more voters who are willing to consider her pitch.
yeah. All right. So on the flip side, Donald Trump and Latinos in 2024. Go.
Well, on the flip side, the bad news for Latinos is we're still really underrepresented. Like
Mhm.
there's not that much of a political power, but we can be the flashy thing that both campaigns show. Like I have like they're my Latinos now. No, they're my Latinos now, and it's not up to Kamala Harris or Donald Trump to decide that. This idea of Latinos moving rightward, I'm always reluctant to believe it. I think the real story there, if you look at the long-term trends, is how leftwards they moved during the Obama and early Trump years.
Yeah.
And I think things are balancing out more or less where you would expect for a population with a big diversity and big ideological diversity.
And it's always been there.
Yeah,
I mean,
the famous Bush got 44% of Latinos. Yeah, of course he did. He spoke Spanish. He visited the communities and knew how to behave, and he didn't look nervous around Latinos. He did everything a politician needs to do with any particular demographic.
right. All right. So there's a lot of attention on the presidential, but you cover a wide range, and you're like one of the hardest working Latino journalists I know in the political arena. And I say that with pride, my friend. You deliver. So what other issues or elections, anything about this cycle that you as a reporter, as a writer, say to yourself, I wish this got more attention because it represents that complexity of the Latino community that people should know more about in the mainstream?
This is not convenient for me particularly to say,
Oh,
because I have not been giving enough attention to Puerto Rico, because there's only so much you can do.
yeah. And for the record, I've known you for years, and I've seen your work. So as a Puerto Rican journalist, I've always given you props about it.
But yeah, over the past 6 months to a year, I think I've faltered. And yeah, it was a very lonely beat, the Puerto Rico beat, when it did sort of come to the forefront. There were maybe two or three of us covering it in English, and Puerto Rico has its own sort of media landscape,
Mm-hmm.
and there's some fantastic journalists, and its own newspapers. So it's not like they need us, like from the media point of view. It's more like we need them.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons Puerto Rico is important, the gubernatorial race there is huge. It'll likely stay with the statehood party, but instead of a pro-statehood Democrat, you'll have a pro-statehood Republican
Who has defended Trump and says he's been great for the island.
Who has been, I think, one of the smartest politicians of the Trump era, has surfed that wave sort of without really losing her identity. I mean, Jennifer Gonzalez Colon is a conservative. She is a Republican. She never tried to hide that. And she has supported Trump and said like very pro-Trump stuff, but she's never, I guess the Democrats would say some big Trump supporters have sort of debased themselves, and some people who didn't want to support Trump. I don't really share that sentiment with the big Trump supporters, because that's what they want. They want a president like Trump. With the people who secretly hate Trump, but like say all the things that Marjorie Taylor Greene would say, or Matt Gaetz would say, and and in private just fume about what they have to say to keep their political careers alive. That's a little bit of a tougher judgment, and Jennifer has avoided getting there. And one more reason why Puerto Rico is important right now: the ballot will probably have a statehood.
Here we go again.
I mean, probably will have.
It's going to have
a statehood vote, and this statehood vote might be the most significant. Puerto Ricans have taken that vote, and you know this better than I do, in a ton of circumstances, and there's always a reason to say why it's not credible. This will be the most credible one, and the statehooders are they're rightly, I would say, very optimistic.
Just to stick on Jennifer Gonzalez, who, quite frankly, has been typical Puerto Rico politics, even on the diaspora, obviously not portrayed as someone friendly to Puerto Ricans who might be a little bit more progressive and Democratic leaning. But she's got the most votes the last time as resident. She was the most popular candidate in 2020 of any other candidate in Puerto Rico.
I think only statehood itself as a concept got more votes than she did.
Yeah. So whatever she does, she is a consequential politician and a conservative woman, and really is someone who has played the game. I think you're absolutely right. When you just said one of the more, like, it's almost like Teflon when it comes to her and Trump, right? And no one really talks about it. And it's simple. Down in Puerto Rico, simple. Before we wrap this up, because I just have two more questions, but even what just happened in Venezuela, right, Rafa? You have the Jennifer Gonzalez campaign, because the biggest threat, and they're placing second right now, is this leftist alliance, this center-left alliance between the Independence Party and the New Citizens Movement Party, which is sort of center-left, and like the Populares, the status quo. We might be seeing the end of the Popular Party in a lot of ways in terms of power. It is constant right now in local Puerto Rico media about Gonzalez's campaign saying, like, Dalmao, you support Maduro. And that thing, the Puerto Rico-Venezuela thing, do not underestimate that. That moves votes.
It is huge. It does. And I mean, I'm glad you brought up Venezuela, because it's getting a lot of coverage right now, but that our countries of origin and how we relate to them, and why our countries of origin have the kinds of problems that, find so many millions of us here instead of there, that is just always undercovered. It's sort of a lot of people, like the whole debate over whether Vice President Harris was in charge of the border or not. I mean, of course not. The Secretary of Homeland Security is the only person managing the border, and even he doesn't want that job. Nobody wants that job.
It is that type of job right now with immigration, as you know, you've covered that forever. It is a lose-lose. Nobody wants that job. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, no, it's a terrible job. It can be done better or worse, obviously. But to think that the vice president would have anything to do in something that's so technical, there's that policy arena, and U.S. politics doesn't separate the border and migration as a phenomenon. And if you don't separate those two, then she's the border czar. Fine. But if you don't separate those two, you also are showing that you don't understand either one.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that I think is the other undercovered aspect, despite all the headlines about Venezuela.
Right. And also just the historic election from where you're from Mexico. And
Oh,
right. That feels like ages ago, right? Talk to
century.
me.
But
Migration is going to be a campaign issue, but give me your take or your reporting on whether U.S. Mexico policy will still remain. I feels like it's just one of our biggest trading partner. It's never gonna. It's like it doesn't feel like it's consequential change, but you could have two women leaders in perhaps one of the most important economic relationships in the world.
I would argue the most important.
So what? How do you frame that?
Well, I mean, as like a lot of things, the relationship between the United States and Mexico, and I will admit to being biased here, being a Mexican living in the United States, but I think it is the most important bilateral relationship on earth, bar none. Period. Maybe the Russia-Ukraine one is more important, but we don't want to get there.
Yeah.
It is going to be night and day, and we're never going to see what the other version had looked like, whether Trump wins or whether Harris wins.
And it's not biased, my friend. I don't know about you, but one editor told me once, you write too much about Puerto Rico. And I'm like, I was born and raised there. So like, I'm just trying to catch it. It's like, I think it's interesting. I think the Mexico-U.S. relationship moving forward is always interesting. It's always consequential. We do not give it as much attention as we do. I actually think you get it more, right? From my take, I feel like it's more of a topic in Mexico than it is here because it's so simplistic here.
It's more immediately consequential in Mexico, but Mexican politics does the same thing of turning away from this biggest thing that is happening in the two economies and just pretending it's not there, because so much of it does work seamlessly. The part that doesn't work seamlessly is, I mean, you take Europe, where they unified a bunch of countries that are very different. I mean, Romania and Luxembourg have very little in common, and so much less in common than Mexico and the United States, I would say. And the concept was free movement of capital, goods, and people.
Yeah,
we have free movement of goods, relatively free movement of capital, definitely not free movement of people. And it's not to advocate for the European model, but when those three economic factors are sort of calculated under such different rules, there are imbalances that result in the need for further government intervention. And that government intervention in large part looks like CBP on the border. They have a lot of work to do.
Listen, final thoughts about all this. As a veteran reporter, you've been doing this, you're one of the best in the game. And I don't say that lightly, but moving forward in the next couple months, and I don't need a prediction or anything. I just you and the work, and how does it feel? Like, how does it feel for you, like doing this on this path that you've been doing for some time now?
For a better part of a decade. Yeah. First thing, you are absolutely too kind to me, and there are much harder working reporters out there.
My mom raised me right. You're a good dude. We've shared meals. We had a great time in Miami last year. That was one of my favorite meals last year. So
that was great. I'll look backward to look forward. When I started this beat, and nobody expected The Hill to suddenly say, like, oh, we're going to cover Latinos as a political entity. Everybody's like, what? That's the whitest newspaper in Washington. And no, they had the idea before they hired me. So much credit to Diana Marrero, who's fantastic news executive.
Yep.
And former journalist. She had the idea. She sold it to our editor-in-chief, Bob Cusack, who's still there. And, I walked in the door interviewing for a different job, and they're like, well, would you like to do this instead? I'm like, yep, that sounds good. So that's really, like, I landed there. And when I would tell people at 8 years ago what my beat was, they'd be like, what? I don't, is that a beat? Like, why don't you do like the ugliest version of it is like, oh yeah, why don't you have a beat for white people? It's like, basically they all are.
But that's called mainstream media. That's the beat.
Yeah, what's the distinction? Why don't we have a beat for air breathing humans? Like, it's just it our job is to point out, new and interesting and different trends, not to like talk about what we know is happening. Now I say it, like I cover Latino politics, like in any kind of room, and everybody's like, oh, okay, cool. Yeah.
Yeah. I think you're absolutely, I think that sense of like now it's becoming part of the national conversation way more than it was 10, 15 years ago. But I keep doing the work. Rafael Bernal, Rafa, thank you so much for being my debut guest on the Latino Newsletter.
That's an honor. Yeah. One thing I want to leave you with, covering Latino politics, a lot of people say that's immigration. It's like, yes, we cover immigration as part of it, but we don't cover immigration. The beat is not immigration. The beat is the immigrants. And that's a huge difference.
Dude, Rafa Bernal, just dropping knowledge. Even after I outro you, mucho abrazo. Thanks again for being on the Latino Newsletter.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be your inaugural guest.
I just want to thank Rafa again for being on. It was a quick conversation, but where else are you going to get conversations about politicians like Jennifer Gonzalez and how she seems to be using Trump as an advantage with Puerto Ricans? I love the take on Mexico City and just the context, right? So thank you again, Rafa. All right, so here's the part where I say that the Latino Newsletter is produced by me, Julio Ricardo Varela, and my homie and fellow Knicks fan, Joaquin Kotler. And the mixing and sound design is by Joaquin Kotler. And the music is by Cast of Characters via Soundstripe. So if you like what you heard, share this podcast, rate us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Audible, iHeartRadio, and other places where you find us. You can tweet us at Lat Newsletter and follow us on all other social media platforms with the handle The Latino Newsletter. I still am like pissed at Twitter X that I can't even put The Latino Newsletter as a profile. It's not that long of a profile. But anyway, that's the difference. We will be back next week with another guest, another great conversation. Julio Ricardo Varela, The Latino Newsletter. Peace out, y'all.